Hello and welcome to another webinar in our installment of the Science of Reading webinars. I'm Yevgen Borodin, the CEO of CAPTI, and I'll be your host and facilitator today. We hope you will walk away today with new tools for developing sentence processing. We've been covering different skills in each of the webinars. Go to the next slide. Yep. So this webinar is hosted by CAPTI. That helps assess, accommodate, and advance reading. And today's topic is developing sentence processing skills, and our main speaker is Dr. Opatz. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, thank you. All right,
Well,
welcome to this webinar. So we'll be talking about developing sentence processing skills. And some of you may be wondering, what does that even mean? So hopefully by the end of today, you will have a bit more of an understanding of what it really means to develop sentence processing skills. So throughout today's webinar, what we're going to do is really ground ourselves within the science of reading and specifically look at the language structure strands. And the strands are coming from Scarborough's reading rope. We'll look at syntax and semantics, and then we'll look at how to address both syntax and semantics within the classroom. And then I'll show you the tool that you can, or a tool that you can use to measure sentence processing skills. And then I'll leave some time at the very end of the session today for some questions and answers. So when I first began my teaching career, I was trained as an English language development teacher in the state of Arizona. And within the state of Arizona, it's an English-only state, so meaning that anyone who is not yet proficient in English, students were placed into a specific classroom where they needed to learn English and become proficient to enter the mainstream classroom. There are a lot of issues with that design, but the one thing that I was really able to get from that experience was developing my understanding of language. And as a monolingual English speaker growing up, and then also going through my teacher education program, I didn't get much information about how language operated or operates. So it was really illuminating to me to have that experience, to really gain that understanding of language at a really foundational level to really be able to support students. So when we think about the sentence, it's really a mighty aspect, and it's a mighty aspect of language when we get into disciplinary texts. So I'm going to share a sentence from a 5th grade science textbook, and all I want you to do right now is just read this sentence and see if you can make sense of it. So I just want to remind you as you're reading it, it's from a 5th grade science textbook. So as you read that, and hopefully you had enough time to read it, as you read it, it might help if I give you some context with the picture, but that also may not help. This sentence is dense and complex. And it's really important to recognize that sentences aren't these like small units of meaning all the time that are super easy to comprehend. When we get into upper elementary and secondary classrooms, sentences are really difficult within the texts that students are confronting every day. So I share this with you because it's important to note that when we process language, it occurs at multiple levels. So first, we have the word level. So this could be like volcano. If you have any background knowledge on volcanoes, it might conjure up like that image that I showed you of a volcano. That would be at the word level. So you have to be able to understand the words within the text. But then you can also, you also have to be able to process the language at the phrasal level. So in this case, one of the phrases in this sentence is a volcano is a rupture. So you have to be able to understand that that all works together. You'd also have to be able to understand what a rupture is. And then at the bigger processing level, it's at that whole sentence. So this entire sentence is really a difficult sentence to read because it's packing in so much information about a volcano, and it's using this really elevated language like rupture or a planetary mass object. So this is a difficult sentence based on the words within the sentence, the number of phrases, and those really join together to make a very difficult sentence. In addition to all of these levels, you'd also have to be able to understand how this sentence packs in the information and connects to the information within a complete text. So I present this to you just as thinking about like, what does it really take to process the information at that sentence level? So before we dive too far into this topic, I just want to contextualize it within the science of reading. And I'm using Scarborough's heuristic of the reading rope, which shows us all of these skills that have to be woven together to really get to skilled reading. And today specifically, we're going to look at language structures. We're going to look specifically at the syntax and semantics to really be able to understand meaning at that sentence level. So that's where we're going to jump in. I just want to let you know, if you are interested in any of the other topics within the reading rope, we have a series of webinars on those. Okay, so let's jump into syntax. So when we think about syntax, this is referring to the formation of sentences and then how those sentences are grammatically structured based off of various rules. These are really important skills to know because the syntactic skills, knowing how words work within a sentence, is actually correlated with reading comprehension and language comprehension. And there is research that suggests that if you know syntax and grammar, it will actually predict later reading success in comprehension specifically. So on the other hand, so syntax is really like knowing that word order. Semantics is different. It's really the study of the meaning of words and sentences, which I think is a lot more of a common practice, like the comprehension. But really, when we think about semantics, it's being able to understand the words, but then how those words work together within a sentence. So I kind of think of when we think of syntax, it's kind of like the what, like we're learning how these words go together. And then semantics kind of says why. Why does it matter if these words are together? What are we really taking away from the sentences and how they are all connected? So as we think about this, it's important to note that word order does matter, but the meaning is even more important. So I wanted to show you something that kind of illustrates that. So if I say the triangle is in the circle, that would look like this. But then if I say the circle is in the triangle, the word order matters, but the meaning really carries the weight. So if I asked you to find which triangle is in the circle and you pointed here, it would illuminate that you don't necessarily know the meaning of the words. So word order is important, but really making sense of the meaning of the words is even more important for long-term reading comprehension success. So let's get into how can we address these skills within the classroom? I'm kind of a why person, so I want to start with that why first. Like, why does it even matter that we should be promoting syntax development within the classroom? And there's a number of reasons. So number one is oftentimes teachers are monolingual English speakers. And there's this phenomenon that De Jong and Harper have called language transparency. So that kind of means that you don't necessarily see language and the way that it's constructed. So oftentimes the focus in instruction is on content. So when you look at a text, you can find those content words. So like in that one sentence that I showed at the very beginning, you were able to probably find volcano. And that is a common practice for teachers. We can find the content within the text, but we don't necessarily see the way that language is constructed to build the disciplinary understanding or even construct the meaning within a text. So we look through the language just to get to the content. So this is a problem, and what we should do about it is make language opaque. Make it so that we can see it. We have to be able to see the construction of the language in order to be able to support students in doing the same thing. And this will really help in constructing meaning. So basically, to do this, we have to teach those grammatical elements that construct sentences. And I think the biggest reason for really making language opaque is so that we can move beyond asking students, well, does it sound right? If you are a struggling reader or a struggling writer or learning a new language, asking that question of, does it sound right, isn't going to help a student. We have to be able to give them the rules and the structures that will be able to help them justify if the word order is correct, and if the sentence construction is grammatically correct. So here's how we can do it. The first way is we can play with language, and really fostering an interest in language through this play is so helpful in terms of like helping students to kind of lower their affective filter that says, ooh, I don't want to try because I might be wrong. So we want to create this environment where we can play with language. So that might be like something where you show students a published author's writing, and then you say, okay, let's actually imitate this sentence. There's truly no right or wrong answer here. Let's just try it out. And you have students use the structure that Maya Angelou used in this sentence, and then have them try it. Another very key aspect here would be to teach the word order rules. We also want students to be able to, similar to what I've shown here, is investigate how sentences are built and then imitate those sentences. Use the same structure and say, okay, we're going to test this out. How does this sentence work? And then let's try it ourselves. And then we're going to also explicitly show students how to expand sentences. There are specific techniques that we can use to really help students expand short sentences into longer sentences to make our sentences more clear. And then we can also teach students how to combine sentences that may be short and choppy, and then make those into long, more complex sentences that aren't choppy and that have a good flow to them. And then finally, it's important just to note that there are studies that suggest that when we show students how to combine or even expand sentences, it actually has a positive effect on reading comprehension, because students are able to see how the phrases within sentences work together to really construct meaning across a sentence and then across a text. So the first strategy that I want to share with you is teaching word order rules. So specifically, when we share word order rules, it helps students to be able to unlock that code of language. So if I taught students that in sentences, there is a rule where subjects come before the verb, and a subject can be a noun or a pronoun, and it might be like, he crawls. I'll just share all of these examples are coming because I have a young baby who just started to crawl, so it was just very present on my mind. You could also have adjectives plus a noun. So adjectives come before a noun. In other languages, adjectives come after a noun, but in English, students have to know that adjectives come before the noun. So it would be like the little baby, little being the adjective and then baby being the noun. We can also have the rule of nouns come, and then there's a linking verb and then an adjective. I would also want to note that it can be a noun at the beginning or a pronoun. And then linking verbs are like am, is, are, and there are a number of others. So then I can share an example with students. I can say the baby, which is my noun, is my linking verb little. And these are just 3 examples. There are 12 basic syntax rules that I think are really helpful for students to understand. And these can really help students in being able to make syntax visible. So that whole goal of like making language opaque so we can actually see it and understand the construction is really helpful for students. So I want to give you this strategy of syntax surgery. It's commonly called within the linguistics community, but this is really helpful for being able to play with language, make new sentences, and really help students understand how language works and sentences are constructed. So I took a sentence from a text about birds and their connection to dinosaurs. So I have all of the words on the screen, and this could be something that you have like cut out and are actually manipulating with students. And what you do is you tell students to arrange the words and record a sentence. And then what they're going to do is identify the specific syntax rules that are represented within the sentence. They don't have to use all of the words, but you can rearrange the words. Then when you're done with one sentence, you rearrange the words and write another sentence and then identify the syntax rules. So what that might look like is students might write dinosaurs are extinct, and that can be their sentence. It's intentional that there are no capitalized letters and there's no punctuation, so that students are really understanding the way that the words work and the word order rules. This also assumes that students know the various types of words so that they know the lexical category or the parts of speech, so that they can really use that to understand how to order this. It also assumes that students would know that a subject is a pronoun or a noun, and then that helps with the construction of sentences. So here, after students construct dinosaurs are extinct, they would be able to recognize that syntax rule of there's a noun plus a linking verb and then an adjective. And that creates a complete thought. So that is a sentence. When they handwrite it or type it, they could include a capital letter and then a period at the end. But that's a way to really think about syntax surgery and being able to help students really make that syntax visible to them, because they can understand how to make the sentence and then how to justify their response based off of English syntax rules. So another one that is more complex, birds are living dinosaurs and they are remarkably similar to their closest extinct relatives. Now, this is a lot longer of a sentence. This is the full sentence that I had taken from the text, but then students can still do the same thing where they're actually able to look at the syntax rules and match it to the various parts of the sentence. So we have a noun plus a linking verb plus a noun, and living dinosaurs. Living is this adjective, so I've also got this other syntax rule that says adjectives come before the noun, and then I've also got a noun is replaced by its pronoun. Here, birds are referring to, or they is referring to birds, and students would have to know that as well. And then we also have their, which is another type of pronoun, and it's connected back to birds as well. So students could make that connection. And then finally, there's this coordinating conjunction used where we have, this is the final rule down here. We have and, so it's connecting birds are living dinosaurs and they are remarkably similar, and then to the rest of the sentence. So when you do this, and it helps to get past that idea of asking, does it sound right? If a student, as I mentioned before, if a student's learning a new language or is struggling with reading or writing, or both, asking them if it sounds right isn't going to help them improve their language skills, but giving them the tools, or in this case, the rules to rely on to recognize, does it sound right? That is very helpful in encouraging students to be able to make sense of the sentence level skills. So another thing that we can do is teach phrase construction. So these are just 4 basic phrases. You can teach students how noun phrases, adjective phrases, verb phrases, and prepositional phrases, how they are constructed. And then what they can do is start to recognize those within the text. I will also give students, this is a sheet that has the same sentence across each of those verb or of the phrases. And I would cut this up and have students sort them into noun, adjective, verb, and prepositional phrases. And they can start to see that within one sentence, all of these phrases exist, but they can start to find those within various sentences. And since I've given that to them, it helps them start to play with language and see how language works within the sentence level. And that one was specifically the phrase, but it's contextualized within the sentence. So then you can also teach basic clauses. And I'm sharing 4 clauses here, and these 4 clauses are really helpful for students to see at the sentence level, to see how does this clause work within a sentence. So specifically, I think it's really helpful to teach dependent clauses and independent clauses, but specifically with dependent clauses, if I wrote it just like this, when he spends time in his crate, that's not a complete thought, and it's a very illuminating practice for students to see that, like, what happens? Like, they have like this question, like, okay, what happens when he spends time in his crate? That shows that it cannot stand alone. But it's really helpful just to teach students these 4 types of clauses. And then I do the same thing. I give them sentences that include these various types of clauses, cut them up, mix them around, and then they can sort them to determine, is this an independent or dependent clause, or is it a restrictive relative or non-restrictive relative clause? So those are 2 ways to do it. And then these are kind of building on each other. So then after going from the phrase to the clause, you can move to the sentence and teach students the types of sentences. And I'm giving students, these current examples come from a 9th to 12th grade course that I taught. And students, I gave them easier sentences so that they could play and access it. The sentences in this case were not so difficult that they wouldn't be able to understand the sentence, because we were really focusing on the language within the sentence. So it was lowering that cognitive demand on the actual content so that they could see the sentence or the phrase or clause and be able to recognize the construction of the various types of language. So then I would do the same thing, have a sort, and the students cut it. I would cut it up. They sort it into those different types of sentences. And something that's pretty common for students to see is that when you move from simple to compound to complex to compound to complex types of sentences, you're building the number of words within the sentence. And that naturally creates more complexity with having multiple words or more words within each sentence. So something else that's really helpful in terms of building syntax, and I mentioned this already, is being able to expand sentences. So when students can start to expand sentences, they can start to see how words work together within a sentence. And this can be really helpful to do, especially like if you're teaching writing and students are writing very short sentences every time, you can start to ask them to give you more context. So various sentence expanders are like who, what, where, when, and why. The who is typically in a sentence. So that one isn't necessarily like an expander that students need a lot of help with. But really, when we think about it, it's that where, when, and why that students need more support in when they're expanding a sentence. So that might look like something like this, where I give students this formula, and then I ask them to tell me where, when, and why. I could pull this out of a text as well and just have students code it and say, okay, who is this sentence about? And they say, the girls. What are they doing? What's the verb? Jumped rope. And then where are they? Outside. When is it? During recess. And then why were they doing this? And in this case, it was for fun. This comes from a book by Jacqueline Woodson. I just took a screenshot of a picture from the book and had students write about the sentence, write about the picture. I think it's really helpful, especially with struggling readers and writers, to give some context. I want to take away all of that, all of the reasons to not get involved. I want to take all of those away and give them access to either a picture or content that is easily accessible for them to be able to jump in to the learning. And again, this is to help make language opaque so that we can see it and we can understand how that construction works. So there are a couple of things that I want to mention just about the way that I've presented this information. Specifically, I said, number one is teach the language construction. So it follows this gradual release of responsibility of that I do, we do, you do. So first, I'm going to teach the language construction, and I'm going to show students that language construction. Then we're going to do a sort so that they can identify the language pattern. You could do this in a number of ways. It could be, as you're reading a text, to say, okay, can you find that language pattern? You would have to know that it's in the text, but you want students to be able to start to identify the language pattern, do some sorting or some type of interaction with language to be able to find that. Then you can start to investigate the pattern. Here's where I would actually say it's like that one step further is by finding it in a text. So investigate. Can you find a simple sentence in this text? What about, can you find any of those syntax rules within the text? Like, do you see an adjective coming before a noun? See if you can find those patterns within a text, and then have students try it. They can imitate a pattern and they can try it. We're not looking for perfection. We just want students to try to imitate that pattern, sort of like that pattern that I showed you at the very beginning or earlier, where Maya Angelou's sentence was on the screen. Do something like that where students can imitate it and see that they can actually make these like really sophisticated sounding sentences with a little bit of support. So that's really the bulk of how to really use syntax to be able to help students recognize those various language constructions. Then the next step would be to promote semantics in the classroom. And I have this detective on the screen because when we think about semantics, it's like, why do we want to teach semantics? And it's really so that students can gain meaning from the text. It's closely related to comprehension, but I want to break it down even more from that. Comprehension so often is thought of as like that text level, like the whole text comprehension. But I want to break it down to like that sentence level and even phrasal level to say, what's the meaning that we're getting from this like 3-letter or 3-word part of the text, like this phrase? What does that mean? So really, we're going to promote semantics just to really gain meaning from the text at various levels of understanding. So now the next question would be, how do we do this? And I think the best way that we can do this is to encourage students to become language detectives. So we want them to explore and question the meaning of a text. We want them to wonder, like, well, what does that mean? Or like when I showed you the dependent clause example, we want students to say, like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like what happened when the dog spends time in his crate? We want students to start to like really get curious about language. So we want them to investigate the relationship between the words, phrases, and clauses within a sentence. We want them to look at that relationship between sentences, like how do these sentences work together? Why are they related? What type of information are they really combining together to get us? And then we also want them to be able to find the relationship across paragraphs and across the complete text. But I list it this way specifically because I think so often we start with that whole text, but we don't necessarily know where comprehension is breaking down. So we need to really support students in building an understanding at this smaller level to be able to construct meaning across the text. So when we construct meaning across the text, there are a few things that we have to know. So there are specific linguistic markers that are used, and one of them is called a logical connector or a discourse marker. And these have different uses. So the primary use is to develop reasoning across a text. So you're using these specific type of discourse markers to kind of signal a relationship, or in oral language, we do it just to keep the conversation moving. And that's a similar reason in writing, they're just not as frequent. So these can be explicit, like the word because in this sentence. When they are explicit, that's actually a really clear indicator for students to say, oh, okay, because is being used, it should be a cause and effect type of relationship within the text. However, when students start to get into middle school and high school, it's more common to see that the relationship is implicit without an explicit discourse marker. So here it's just the construction of the sentence. With all the snow, the deer population suffered. It's important to note that both of these are signaling causality, but the second, the implicit relationship within the sentence is harder to understand for students, and they have to be taught that there is a difference. Or I shouldn't say that there's a difference. They should be taught that they have this same relationship, but one of them is harder for us to recognize because there isn't this explicit marker kind of jumping out at us. So this means that we should teach these various text structures so that students can say, okay, this one is causal, oh, this one's comparing. So being able to like really recognize different text structure. And when I say text structure, I even mean within the sentence, like what's the relationship that's being built within this sentence? And then we should also teach these specific discourse markers. So when I say discourse markers, I mean, is it signaling adding or sequencing? And these are very common discourse markers that I have on the screen that students could be taught to look for in a text to be able to say, okay, these are signaling something to us, like what is the meaning behind this? So another thing that students really have to look for when they are constructing meaning across text is reference. So reference are pronouns and synonyms that are used to create this chain of reference across a text. So reference just meaning it's like referring to another area of the text. So I have a couple of examples. So here I have the banker had no money left to loan. He was out of money. So in this case, it would benefit students to be asked, who is he referring to? And they should be able to look back and say, oh, it's referring back to the previous sentence and the banker. And that's an important skill for students to know. It seems like most students can do this type of finding the reference that's being made. It's a little bit more challenging when we get into words like this, these, or that. In this case, it's more challenging. So if you read that first sentence, and then you read this second sentence, and this meant, you have to understand that this is referring back to the information, all of this information in the previous sentence. And then you have to connect it to the outcome. So what happened because of this previous sentence, like what's the outcome? And in the case here, it was that the white suffragists were actually able to vote, but then they didn't bring along the women of color. So this packs in a lot of meaning, and it's kind of like this hidden meaning. So if you said, okay, what is this referring back to? Students would have to be able to summarize this previous sentence to be able to say that to be able to say what this truly means. Okay, so the first two were pronouns, and now this final one is an example of a synonym. So here it says the printing press was invented in 1440. The invention allowed for large amounts of information to be shared. So in this case, we don't have a pronoun, but we have a synonym being used to refer back to the previous sentence. So these are a little bit more hidden within the text, but it's really important for students to recognize that there's a connection between these two things. So you could ask students, well, what does the invention, what is that referring to? And they would have to go back to that previous sentence and say, the printing press. This is intentional. Writers do this so that they're not constantly saying the printing press, the printing press. We use synonyms to have varied words to support our readers in like reading and not just being bored of the same words. But it's important for students to recognize that there is a specific connection between these types of synonyms. So a few things to note is to be able to support students with building that meaning across, these are specifically across sentences, but you could say across the text, or even within the text if you had various clauses that were using the same technique. We want students to be able to connect the subject or the object pronoun back to the noun that it refers to. So an example that I already shared is that he goes with the banker. Another thing is that you want students to be able to connect demonstrative pronouns, so like this, that, these, or those, to the things or ideas that it refers to. And then finally, you want to be able to support students in finding those synonyms that are used to refer to the same concept. And these are really helpful for supporting students in making that, or in constructing that meaning that goes across the phrases, clauses, sentences, paragraphs, and the whole text. Oops. Okay, so now I want to show you a tool for measuring sentence processing skills. And first, I just want to mention, so specifically with sentence processing, it's really important to be able to measure this skill because students, we don't often measure whether or not they have the ability to understand the nuanced meaning of sentences. And if we don't know if they're able to do that at the sentence level, we may not be able to support them if we think it's more of like this whole text issue. So this is breaking it down the text level into sentences to be able to say, can students grasp the meaning at the sentence level? It's also important because if students have poor sentence processing skills, it's an indication that they're struggling with comprehension. And it might, like this may be despite being skilled in like their word recognition and decoding skills. So it's important to be able to say whether or not students are struggling at that sentence level. And we also know that these sentences become more and more complex through school. So as students increase in grade, the sentences become more difficult. So they may be able to process these simple sentences, but they may not be able to recognize those connections between independent clauses and dependent clauses, or even like what the subordinating conjunction is really signaling. So I'm going to show you read basics in CAPTI. And before I do, I just want to show you an example. So for sentence processing, it's a fill in the blank item type. And there are two types of questions. So there's discourse markers that's similar to what I showed you earlier. It could be like words like because, and then there's logical connections. And that represents like, are students able to recognize the word that helps complete the sentence to create a complete thought. So in the example here, this would be a logical connection. So we have until the job was done. And if they said except or however, that wouldn't make a semantically correct sentence. So it's really focusing on being able to complete that sentence and make it a complete thought. Okay, so I'm going to jump into CAPTI Assess with Read Basics and just show you what that looks like within, let me get this, within the system. Okay, so within CAPTI, I'm logged in as a teacher. So what I'm going to show you first is how to make an assignment. So within CAPTI, you can, here's Read Basics. So within CAPTI, I would be able to say, let's say I want to do a spring assessment. And then I'm going to make it 7th grade. So CAPTI with Read Basics has 6 subtests based off of the foundational reading skills. And since I'm talking about sentence processing today, I just want to point out that if I were to only do sentence processing, I just wanted to see how students were doing at specifically with like sentence comprehension or the sentence processing skills, I could do that in 9 minutes. So it takes about 9 minutes for students to complete this subtest. And I think that can be really helpful. You could do the whole battery and it will tell you exactly how much time it will take, or I should say roughly how much time it will take. So about 76 minutes. So that's how I would create a new assignment. And that is very quick and easy to do. After students complete the assessment, I can go into reports and I'm gonna look at the middle school level and at my class. So I get this global picture of how students have done. Each of the subtests has its own reporting on the scale score, the grade equivalency, and then the RTI tier recommendations. Scale score goes from 190 to 310. Students who are red are weak, and then we have low average, high average, and strong. So I want to jump in to a specific student and just show you what their scores look like. But before I do that, I also want to show you this. So I can sort by the individual subtests to see how students are doing in their scores. And then that would also illuminate who might be struggling with comprehension at that sentence level. And I can see the students that might be struggling right here. So I'm going to sort again by student name and find one student that I'd like to show you. Okay, so when I click on each of the students, you'll see that the reports show you a performance overview. There are scale score, percentile, and grade equivalency. And then there's an individual chart for each of the subtests and also for Lexile. So you can see how the students done across the year. As I scroll down here, I'm to sentence processing now. And I can see that the student Gene, he increased his score in sentence processing across the year. So this is really telling us that his ability to comprehend at that sentence level has improved across the academic school year. Within each of the subtests or the foundational skills, you'll get information about what the student can do at their specific proficiency level or performance level, and then what they would benefit from. So here, Gene is just shy of 265, which is that strong performance level. So his sentence processing has definitely improved across the year, and he's showing some close to that strong performance level in sentence processing. So it's important to note that when you are struggling with sentence processing, you are often struggling with reading comprehension and other skills that are more advanced. So in this case, that reading efficiency, which is a silent reading fluency measure, and reading comprehension. So so once students really are able to comprehend at that more basic level of the word, phrase, clause, sentence level, that often supports students in achieving reading comprehension success. So here you can see that at the beginning of the school year of 7th grade, I should mention this, all names here are pseudonyms, and this is based off of real student data, but it's all fictionalized in this case. So at the beginning of the year, Jean was at 240, which is that low average. And through instruction that not only focused on vocabulary and morphology, but also understanding sentences at that word level, that phrasal level and clause level, he was able to improve his reading comprehension and reading efficiency because of his improved ability at that sentence processing level. So this assessment is really able to help identify the areas that students need support in, and then you can actually measure growth over the year on foundational reading skills. So as far as the recommendations go, when students complete the assessment, they will get specific recommendations on their performance level. So here, Jean is still at that low average on word recognition and decoding. So the recommendation would be for Jean to get some word analysis skill. I'm going to go down to sentence processing since that's what we're talking about. So now he's at that high average performance level. So for him, the recommendation, which should not be surprising since that's what I'm talking about today, is to really focus on constructing sentences and then focusing on the function of the various types of discourse markers. Okay, I'm going to go back to my slideshow here, and that is all I wanted to share there. So now I'm going to go ahead and yeah, again, did you want to take over here?
Yes, sure. So CAPT Assess Will ATS Read Basics were developed with support from the Department of Education and the NSF, and a literacy solution helps assess, accommodate, and accelerate reading. Next. It's very easy to implement with integrations with all the major LMSs and student information systems, whether using Clever or Google Classroom. ClassLink is coming in August. Go next. Also, there's a professional development training available with it. The Read Basics comes free with free basic product training, which is done to your convenience, takes anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. When the paid PD teaches educators on the science of reading and who, when, and how to assess, how to interpret the results, and what to do with the results, how to help students improve. Next. And if you want to learn more about Read Basics, want to get a personalized demo for your team, just want to inquire about pricing. Oh yeah, and by the way, we just announced a summer school program, so you could use this assessment with up to 50 students this summer, free of charge. So email Erica if you want to take advantage of that special program we have for summer school. Otherwise, Erica can provide pricing for next school year. It is one of the most affordable assessments. And that's all I have. If you have any questions for Margaret.